weed, hang out, have a good time. But when you're a political analyst, right, you have a responsibility to the country. You have a new obligation to be honest, to be sincere.
What's going on, you guys? Today we have Kyle Kulinski cutting ties with Joe Rogan. Kyle Kulinski is saying that Joe Rogan has gone too far. Let's dive in.
Why was the interview so bad? Well, look, I think the format of having two bros hanging out talking shit, it's just completely inadequate when you're dealing with a pathological liar, a massively corrupt billionaire war criminal Epstein buddy. It's just not one where you can sit and shoot the shit and giggle. It's just the stakes are too high. The stuff on this man's resume is too much to pretend like, yeah, we're just two bros hanging out, doing our thing and just casually talking. And so that's the bottom line for all the shit people give mainstream media. At least in mainstream media, there's some semblance of being more adversarial than what I watched in that interview yesterday. So I should also point out, there's this Lex Friedman clip where Rogan and Lex are talking, and Rogan gives a very insightful response to the idea that he should have Trump on his show. I actually tweeted it out last night, but he basically says, like, look, I don't want to have anything to do with helping him, whether it's purposeful, I don't want to do that, or inadvertent, I don't want to do that. And you'd be surprised at how much you can rehabilitate somebody's image. And I think Joe's been open about the fact. He's like, look, I'm not the guy for that interview. I don't have the tools to, adequately push back where you need to push back. This is something he's acknowledged in the past. And then now he decided to have him on. So why did he decide to have him on? Look, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that there are these other podcasts, people that are in his sphere of influence, people like Theo Von, for example, or Andrew Schultz. And these are guys who have had Trump on. And so now Joe's looking at it, and Joe's a very competitive guy. And he goes, well, if they're going to have him on and they're going to get, a gazillion view episode with them, well, why shouldn't I also have him on and do the best I think I can in that format? And, I think it's a competitive thing, and I think he sees people who were.
I think that really makes the point that we were underlining earlier, Gavin. If Joe Rogan has gotten in the position where he's chasing, and not just chasing mainstream media, right? It's not like he's chasing Tucker Carlson. It's not like he's chasing some huge major network.
For context, this was right after Joe Rogan had Donald Trump on before the presidential election. This was right before he endorsed Trump. But by the looks of it, Joe Rogan had Trump on the podcast, and he was giving nothing but softball questions the entire time. There was no hard-hitting actual investigation going on who this guy is, who's about to run the country.
That just got a scoop. He's chasing guys like Andrew Schultz on the Flagrant One podcast. Ugh. He's chasing people who are 100% Donald Trump nut huggers, but they put a cool streetwear vibe on it, right? They're all in that community of comics that Joe Rogan really amplified their career, right? There's a difference between the comics who Joe made their entire career. Those guys all suck. Tony Hinchcliffe, he's not funny. Brian Redband, not funny. Okay, but Tim Dillon, some of these guys like Andrew Schultz, they were funny enough to get Rogan's attention, and then he amplified them. Ari Shaffir, never funny. Joe Rogan just made him famous because he was on the show all the time. Brendan Schaub was never funny. He got a comedy special because he knew Joe Rogan, right? But some of these guys that Joe Rogan now has to compete with, he's like, oh, God, I made you. I launched you into that stratosphere, and now you're doing the numbers that I'm doing because you know how to be relevant, because you're youthful. We often forget, Joe Rogan's like 60 years old. He does not know what's cool anymore. He does not know what's going on in the world, and he doesn't know how to make relevant humor. The last joke Joe Rogan wrote that I laughed at was about the founding fathers, okay? That's the kind of headspace he's in. He's an old man reading history books.
Weinstein?
That's the same comedy special, but yeah.
Oh, okay, because that's the last one I left at.
Exactly. That's where his head is at.
Yeah.
Right? And that was 8 years ago, bro. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's interesting because I think there's one role that I could actually see Joe Rogan effectively playing in this sort of a setting. And it was floated in the previous election cycle. It's something that was talked about, but obviously never actually came to fruition. And that's the idea of Joe Rogan actually moderating a presidential debate. As cringy as his interview with Donald Trump was, I actually think Joe Rogan would excel much more in the position of a moderator in a debate instead of just like a one-on-one interview. And I say that because he actually did a pretty good job moderating that debate that we talked about between Graham Hancock and Flint Dibble, even though he was totally obviously on team Graham. Graham's literally his friend, his homie, and he, made him famous essentially. He's still
Andrew Schultz is just as bad. You have him, you have Tony Hinchcliffe, you have all of these stooges that are with Joe Rogan that are just going to follow whatever he's saying and follow wherever he's going. And Joe Rogan is just going to follow whatever his boss is going to say. And his boss right now is Dana White. But as far as, these other things that are going on, he may be able to speak up eventually about Trump, with all of these different deportations that are going on with these students, where they're talking against the Palestine-Israel conflict. I see that Joe Rogan is starting to potentially give a little bit of pushback, but for the most part, he is going to continue to just listen to whatever Trump is saying.
Really good job staying neutral for the most part in that debate and kind of being able to sense who was BSing who and who was more on point. That's the vibe I got, at least. And I think that generally he does do better in those sorts of roles. Where he really fails is in the kind of adversarial, like, I'm going to ask tough questions and do follow-ups, like that sort of a thing. But do you agree with me at all? Do you think there could be some usefulness in like him moderating a conversation between two candidates?
My first reaction was that you were smoking crack, but I decided to be a good friend and hear you out for a second. And I do think that you fortified your argument a lot when you brought up the debate between Graham Hancock. Here's the only pushback that I would have. I think that he might be able to do a fine job. I would hate to elevate Joe, and again, call me a cringy liberal. I just don't think that politically this would be the right strategy in the long run, to elevate Joe Rogan as if he is a neutral party, as if he is a neutral political ground to stand on, to elevate him as if he is somebody to go to in that circumstance. Because I think what makes Joe Rogan awesome, what made his show great, was what Kyle described in the first 60 seconds of this video. Two dudes talking. Hey, bro, just give me your whole spiel. And that works so well if you're Alex Honnold and you just free solo climb, the tallest mountain ever. Or, oh my gosh, bro, I can't believe you walked from Connecticut all the way to New Mexico. What did you learn on your way? Or, wow, you found a bone that you're pretty sure belonged to Jesus. Tell me about it. That works great, because then you can ask all the regular Ask Joe questions, no pun intended, right? Smoke a little weed, hang out, have a good time. But when you're a political analyst, right, you have a responsibility to the country. You have a new obligation to be honest, to be sincere, to be critical, right? To take a tough position for the good of the fucking country. I really agree with everything that Kyle says here.
Me too. And like I said, I think that if Trump wasn't currently running for president, I would totally understand Joe Rogan's desire to have a conversation with him. I mean, what kind of a better interview subject could you possibly ask for as someone who talks to people for a living? This guy was literally president, and he was super controversial. I could pick his brain. What a dream for any interviewer. Like, I understand
interviewing Nixon.
I understand the instinct. Yeah, exactly.
There you have it, you guys. It's a great day to not be a Joe Rogan fan. If you are a fan of Joe Rogan, then it's just important to differentiate him as an entertainer versus him as a politician, or as someone who's a political figure. The same way that I think it's important to distinguish Donald Trump as an entertainer versus as a political figure. The difference between, we could keep on going down to where you have these actors that are now in these, roles of authority. And it's good that you can like them as a person. Of course, you're going to like them as a person. That's what's got them this far. But now their policies actually important. You have to look behind the scenes, between the lines with all of this stuff, and just continue to search for people that are logically sound. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. It's another day in the progressive way.